It was only natural that the Live Alive remake would be on my radar of games I had to play as soon as possible. Being a big fan of 90s era Square JRPGs amongst the likes of Final Fantasy VI and Chrono Trigger, and also being absolutely floored by how gorgeous Octopath Traveler's art style looked. Immediately upon playing this game, I felt like I was playing a classic that was rejuvenated by modern presentation, with a gorgeous aesthetic and cool little touches in the direction, elevating it even further. The concept of sort of a anthology within one video game is a fascinating hook for this game. A lot of the individual stories are very simple and familiar, taking a page out of old stories, movies, and even video games at the time. The simple hijinks of prehistoric humans, a wise Shifu passing on what he's learned to his immature younglings, to less aesthetically pleasing Magnificent Seven, the plot of which is reused in basically every Star Wars show, to Street Fighter or modern fighting games in general, old mecha shows and tokusatsu, to Alien and 2001: A Space Odyssey merged into one. Everything is a clear celebration of genres familiar to anyone that doesn't live under a rock. But the approach of these stories through the lens of a charming JRPG is enough to make the stories feel fresh and engaging. A platform to help reinvent these stories and express them in a whole new way. The game keeps the stories varied by having the stories either be bare bones minimalist, for the gameplay to be the focus, to the story being mostly dialogue. The settings can range from a small little town to something relatively expansive. While Live Alive clearly is a celebration of many genre-defining classic stories, I don't think it's the strength of these small, disparate stories on their own that makes Live Alive special. No. Live Alive shines in the way that these stories come together literally and thematically in the end. You are able to play any of these stories in any order you want except for the final Middle Ages story. This makes players think that this is where the true ending of Live Alive will take place, as it is the most familiar setup and setting of JRPGs, evoking similarities to genre-defining games such as Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy, with even the final protagonist being a silent hero, which is a trope all too familiar within the genre. But there is something off about this. Like when you gain experience, the bar lights up red instead of the blue of the other protagonists. When you meet the hero of old in this story, he has become disillusioned and spouts misanthropic views about the people he has saved. This middle-aged story becomes more and more upfront about themes of hate and the darker side of humanity. It's a hard contrast to the usually idealistic stories about humanity overcoming an abstract idea of evil that happens all the time in these older stories of a sword-wielding knight off to rescue a princess from a dark lord or whatnot. The cynicism of the old hero starts to pervade this story more and more, as the silent hero Orsted finds himself wrapped up in more of a tragedy than expected. When Orsted accidentally kills the king and is outcast by his kingdom, it's a bit of a shock to the system. In a moment of genius, the player travels the kingdom and is shunned by the NPCs that would usually greet him with warmth to the point of giving up and going back to the castle, to find that the wise old man who has done no wrong, tortured to the verge of death once again, enforcing the darkness of humanity in this chapter. Then the cherry on top of this cake of tragedy is finding out that Orsted's friend is the one who orchestrated this tragedy, all because of pent-up selfish emotions of jealousy. After killing his friend and watching the princess kill herself out of grief, there's nothing left for Orsted. And so at this moment, he reflects on everything. The silent hero speaks for the very first time, completely out of disdain and pessimism for his situation and humanity. He gives into hate and misanthropy, and the character who you assumed would be the traditional knight in shining armor is no such thing, as he isn't able to accomplish anything remotely heroic and instead becomes the Dark Lord himself. By the end of the Middle Ages chapter, I was so engrossed in Orsted's chapter because of how he subverted what you would expect of a character like him, and how he completely contrasted the other protagonists. Like, I got legit chills during his final monologue of the Middle Ages chapter. I was already really liking this game, but the final stretch of the game made me adore it. As I went back and changed my views of the game, it made me look back at the positive aspects of humanity the protagonists displayed despite the turmoil they faced. It made me appreciate Pogo's pure and genuine and simple nature, living life on instinct, enjoying just the simple joys in life such as another's love or fart jokes. I appreciate the apprentice for training themselves not just to hone their skills but to improve themselves as a person. Obomaru uses his skills for a creed, Sundown Kid's atonement to just do one right thing in his life. Masaru's respect for the ones he fights, learning not just their techniques but the feelings put into those techniques to better himself as a fighter. Akira's sheer willpower to keep on going despite the turmoil he encounters, taking responsibility for bettering his life. Cube's ironic humanity as a beacon of hope even when the humans around it show disdain for one another. All of these protagonists contrast with Orsted as they experience hardship but still continue to persist. In the end, these characters expose Orsted and are able to reach out to him in a narrative decision that feels like a metaphor for how stories and characters can reflect us and motivate us to do better and to be better. There's a line spoken in the Distant Future chapter by Huey that says, "I've always enjoyed these older stories. They have an earnestness, an adventurous spirit that speaks to me." It's a very understated, underprioritized line in the grand scheme of the narrative, but it's a little crumb that I think sums up what Live Alive is trying to express quite well. It also really adds to it that the line comes in what is chronologically the final chapter in the series. Makes me feel like I'm reflecting back on all the previous stories in the game. This line feels like something that came straight from the creators as they borrow concepts and feelings from famous works of fiction. This makes Live Alive feel like a celebration of stories and cultures throughout history, to celebrate the art of humans expressing emotion through stories. This aspect dovetails extremely well with the themes I've touched on earlier, of humans persisting and proof that there is more to humans than hatred and violence and overall just negative traits, to bundle together a bunch of disparate stories of different time periods and cultures in one work through the lens of a beloved, relatively new medium at the time, and then to connect all these stories by having all the characters come together to stop the personification of misanthropy and nihilism is not only epic, but also profound in a way that is hard to put into words. It gets across a powerful feeling through presentation that is only possible through video games. By fighting against the final form of Odio, with all 7 of the protagonists together in the field for the first time, and final time, once again breaks a traditional JRPG rule, persisting against the personification of nihilism to eventually reach out to the humanity that is still left in Orsted, so he can finally regain himself and land the finishing blow himself, finally doing something heroic, all to the astonishingly beautiful final boss theme of Gigalomania. It's a moment that had me so swept up that when I first played it, I literally said out loud, "This is a masterpiece," as I beat the final boss. This game speaks to me because I too am a sentimental nutcase that loves storytelling more than most things. When I think of the imagery of all the characters from these different stories together in the credits, I think of all the different separate stories that have helped shape me. Some of my favorite stories I can list off are Final Fantasy IX, Steins Gate, Hunter x Hunter, The Lord of the Rings, and Avatar: The Last Airbender, These stories are, at least initially, all coming from different mediums, taking place in different worlds, yet all appeal to people emotionally. Like the characters in the stories of Live Alive are able to reach Orsted. I have characters who have done irreversible construction to my heart. My favorite stories have a common thread of showing us the darker sides of the human condition before eventually looking to the light. They teach me that the human heart is indeed capable of hate, but it's also capable of love, respect, atonement, willpower, and empathy.